Okay, so this second short video is going to talk about what I spoke about first, about the hurried child and the super kid. That kind of a lot of us tend to try to, whether we're ignorantly doing it or not, we're trying to create. I know I was that way, and what the dangers of that is that there's a lot of dangers about it actually. It's in fact very negative. It looks very successful, but it's in fact stunted growth in a lot of really important areas. Because as human beings, we are not just rational, logical creatures. We're emotional creatures, we're social creatures, and we're made in the image of God. Therefore, we must relate, and we should be relating to God and to our neighbor in a way that God has made us, not in a way that's dysfunctional, and the Bible calls sinful. So, thinking through, I think what are some cures for the hurried child? And as you know, maybe as adults we were hurried, like I was, and that has a little bit less to do with always just the cultural things. There's also sinful things that are in there too. There's always a mixture of ignorance and willful sin. Okay, but how do we answer a hurried child and a desire to create super kids that are basically function like miniature adults, but yet we want them to be children? It doesn't add up. It creates a stunted, kind of in a lot of ways, an omission for opportunity to grow socially, spiritually, and emotionally. And it creates a problem, a big problem, I think, for a lot of young people. And then they grow up into basically living as if success is how they're defined, performance is what they are. They're really a performer. They're not more than that. If they're less than that, their life falls apart. So how can we give some cures? What are some cures? I think there are many cures. But I think the first is really just the mindset we have as molders of our kids and shapers of them as mentors, parents, and pastors. I really do. Coaches, counselors that are supporting children and young people in adolescence. I think the first one is that you establish a culture of play. Now, this is the most important for youth pastors and for parents. You're establishing a culture of play, and what I mean by that, okay, is not play that becomes work. Okay, if your kids are involved in theater, or they're involved in sports, or they're involved in something like this, or music, and then it becomes a competitive environment, that all it is based on how well you do. That's not play. That's performance. Okay. There's a time for performance, I think, in competition. But if all the play is developed into is just performance, 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 there is a warped sense of development there. I think our job needs to be to create a space where kids can truly be kids and adolescents can truly be adolescents, where there's a real sense of play, a culture of freedom, a culture of play, a culture of being themselves, yet not at the expense of anyone else. That would be sin. But there's a culture of play that we give. So for parents, are we creating space for our children to just play? To just play. Not to do things to perform, to succeed, but just to play for the sake of playing. It's like the famous athlete or the famous musician that says, just for the purity of the game or for the purity of music, for the love of the game or for the love of music, I just do that. Like they have to get away to do that because everything else just work. So is there a culture of play, a space for play that we're giving and creating, or we're in charge of, right? I think the second one is that we creating space for our kids to live in the real world, okay? As opposed to the virtual world. I'm not against virtual technology. I use it plenty. I'm not against apps or TV, or I'm not against any of that. But when their world becomes more virtual than real, we've got a problem. And we have to really monitor and watch this. Because, see, instead of developing socially and spiritually and emotionally healthy, we're going from performance to retreating into and escaping into false reality. And so that's actually very dangerous, where we're going from this, I've got to pretend and put on this face and put on this mask, like metaphorically, and put on this mask to become something that I know that I'm not, but give my best effort, okay, and to try to fit in. And then I'm going to retreat into this virtual world where I'm going to show who I really am in a lot of ways. Or maybe they're flip-flopped. The virtual world's where they're fake, and then they go off into a club and they kind of just create this unhealthy community. Either way, it's backwards. Either way, it's dysfunctional. Either way, it's unhealthy. Okay? So how much time are we creating for play? Are we creating a culture for that? I'm not saying every day is a play day. I'm simply saying, are you creating a space for play and freedom there where you're not performing and working for approval? Okay? And second of all, are you creating a space for them to be in the real world? Seeing the real world, the needs of the world. Let me give you an example. As a young person, I grew up on 25th and Harvard in Tulsa, and I used to take my bike up and down the street, up by the neighborhoods, etc. And what I would see as I drove my bike is I would see old people in the apartments. I would see young people in the apartments. I would see people that had not a lot. I see people that were skating by. I saw people of color. I saw people that were white. I saw people of different backgrounds in that little neighborhood or two of 25th and Harvard. So when I got out into high school, middle school and high school, and I saw that diversity, I wasn't like, It was normal for me. I was around at the church I was at a church that had a number of elderly people, handful. In fact, I'd probably say a third of it was elderly. What I'm trying to say is, little known to me was that I was in the real world. I wasn't in the most poverty-stricken world. I wasn't in the richest place in the world. I was in like a lower middle class area of Tulsa. But I experienced a lot of the real world. I saw it. I wasn't surprised by it. What I'm trying to say is, are your kids in the real world? Is there a space for them to be in the real world? Maybe it's the public school system. Maybe it's church. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's being around your grandparents enough to see other people their age. But if all they are, or they're around like little tribes that look just like them, talk like them, act like them, walk like them, that's not the real world, and they're gonna really be stunted in their growth. So I'm simply saying, is there a culture of play? Is there a place that they really can see the real world more vividly? Or is everything they're around something that's almost just a piece of the world that can then give a misnomer to what the world really is? And where the world becomes just this performance place maybe, and then everything else is escapism. Can we kind of just be honest about are we giving those places and those spaces, those times for our young people? And lastly, I think the biggest cure for hurried kids, super kids, hurried children, super children, the biggest cure, certainly has been for me, is really reflecting on, is this for me? Is this my need? Or is it the need that my child has? Because really that's love, isn't it? Love is considering the other as more important than yourself. Am I hugging my kid 1,000 times because I need that hug? Or do they need it? I'm sure we both need it. But am I hugging my child or not hugging my child based upon some sort of need or dismissing or avoidance that I have problems with? Or am I hugging them based upon their needs? They need to know I'm there, that I love them. Am I asking my child to perform at a 4.0 or more weighted scale average because I want them to be better than I was? Or am I really doing it so they can become proficient in something? Can I ask myself that question? Can I be honest? Am I sending my kid to 5 events a week to hurry them along to activities because I just really want time to myself? Or is it really for their development? Am I getting my kids so involved in performing, whether it's arts or music or school and academics or sports? Am I getting them so involved with this because there's some sort of need they're meeting for me? Or is it really for them? So what I'm trying to ask here is the hurrying something that we're really leading whether we know it or not? Is the super kid mentality that we might be creating, is it really being led by us? Maybe ignorantly, maybe on purpose, I don't know. But we have to be willing to ask those questions a little bit, because I think a hurried child and a student who is rushed along will really have struggles when it comes to living in both the real world, I think, and to listening to God. Because they're going to think of God as someone who's just trying to get them to grow up, get some project finished, hurry along. So we think of that famous passage in the Gospels where Martha and Mary invite Jesus over, of course, the family of Lazarus. And Martha is doing her thing. She's rushing around. She's cleaning the table. She's getting everything set for dinner, for the meal, and she's trying to get the house cleaned up, and she's doing all the things. In an American culture, it looks like she's being the good sister. She's the one who's doing the things right. She's the spiritually mature one. Look how busy she is. Look how hurried she is. Look how much she's trying to make nice for Jesus. And then Jesus says, why would you ask Mary to come help you? She's figured out the thing that makes the most sense. She's figured out what's most important. What's Mary doing? Sitting. She's sitting down. Not just sitting down, lazily. She's sitting down at the feet of the Master and she's listening. She's listening. What I think probably Jesus is saying here is he's probably saying, Martha, you're doing that for you. You're not doing it for me. Mary's sitting here to listen to me. She's here for me. Let that sit with you. Are you doing it for you? Or are you doing it for God? Are you sitting and listening to God? Or are you trying to scurry around to get him to pay attention to you? Are we doing the same thing for our children? Are we just rushing them around because we're anxious? Are we trying to get them to perform because they're meeting some success measurement that we failed at? Or we want them to perform for us so that we feel like we can give them finally the pat on the back that we never got? Or are they more gifted in certain areas that we wish we had been so they can fulfill those needs? And as we start to recognize that and hopefully rectify that, are we then sitting down together as families at the feet of Jesus, asking for him to tell us who we are, and not trying to perform for him to get him to pay attention, but to recognize that he has performed salvation for us and gives it as a gift freely, that we want to listen to him and sit down and learn from him, and then go out and live and do and have our being. I think there's a lot to learn from the Lord Jesus here when it comes to hurried children. And while the psychologist, David Elkind, has some good stuff to say, I think ultimately we need to make sure that we're listening to the Word of God. What does he say about busyness and rest? What is he trying to teach us? We're living in an addicted culture to performance where the only person who's a sinner is the fat person. I'm right, aren't I? The only person who's a sinner is the one who looks like they're out of shape. Because we live in a culture that is addicted to success and performance and has no time to listen to the one who's done it all. So let's stand back in this COVID season and let's get some perspective. And let's say, what should we do? What is there to do? God, is there anything that you'd like us to serve you in? How can we serve one another? What's the best thing we can do with and for one another? And he'll tell us. But we have to be in a spot that's sitting and listening. I hope that's an encouragement to you. And parents, if you have any questions about that, of how to apply some of that, let's talk. Come by the office and we'll set up a time.